Two things here. If you think about the Overstory as an exposition of conflict between the human and non-human worlds, where you have trees as central protagonists, as a kind of force that defines the novel. And then secondly, if you think about fiction itself, having a central element of her central problem of time being rooted in it, the Overstory has some interesting, kind of problems that arise when you think about the trees themselves as protagonists here. How does their experience of time work with the human being's experience of time within the novel as the characters try to find a way through the world or a way in the world? How do they measure that way against the tick-tock of the trees and their own kind of slower time? Patricia feels this, throughout the novel as she kind of measures the world of the forest and kind of comes to try to understand the communication of the plants within the forest and the trees within the forest. And so she becomes more and more aware of that sense of tick-tock of the tree's time, and how human beings can't live on that time, or how human beings cannot embrace that sense of the world. As she notes on page 220, the starry sky erupts above her all the explanation a person needs for why humans have waged war on forests forever. Forests panic people. Too much is going on there. Humans need a sky. So there's a very distinct difference between the ways in which the tree experiences the world and the ways in which the human being experiences the world. And the question is, how do these characters take on a sense of how the tree finds a place within the world? As Pavlicek, experiences this, he comes face to face with a new reality of time and how trees are in the world. There's the moment when he's in the bar celebrating the planting of his 50,000th tree, and the guy in the bar kind of corners him and says, "Those companies you plant for, you realize they get good citizen credits for every seedling you plant. Every time you stick one in the ground, it lets them raise the annual allowable cut." And so Pavlicek comes to the realization, right, that in some ways he's kind of abetting the company's, clear-cut policies. As he plants their trees, they are able to harvest more and more of the old growth trees from the ancient stands that are throughout the West here. And so he comes face to face with the force of capital at this point. And the ways in which capital measures time and space are very different from the ways in which trees experience time here. And Pavlicek has the moment when he goes back to the park where the trees have been cut down, page 206, and he examines the tree rings on the stumps. As Powers writes there, the first of the fresh stumps still oozes resin. The years roll away under his fingers. There are floods and droughts. He doesn't know how old this city is, but the tree was clearly a sturdy sapling before any white people came near this spot. He writes on the stump itself, "Cut down while you slept." So he's, growing in his, sense of disdain for the movement of capital, which, propels the humble timbers kind of cashing out of every scrap of timber they can find, every old growth tree that they can take down for timber, and Pavlicek becomes more and more to hate that aim, and it kind of propels and drives him through this novel, particularly in his friendship with Mimi, right? That she comes from from an engineering background, and so she looks at the world with a sense of utility of how things can be used to improve process. As she looks at the trees, as she's making her way to the protest, she realizes that she's an engineer, for crying out loud. These trees are calling out to be used, and so she sees the world through an engineer's eyes, and the tension that she feels throughout the novel is, will she come to see the world through the tree's eyes in some way as well? Also, another character, in terms of the ways in which capital measures time and space, it's kind of interesting here is Nile, right? When he's when he's talking to one of his associates about mastery and how it's a time eater, that people get hooked into that virtual world and have trouble coming out of it, that they continue to play and play, and how it's starting to eat into other companies' productivity because their employees are playing the game all the time. And Eli realizes to himself on 227, it might not be too bad to destroy a little productivity. So, Nilai's starting to see, that sense of the ways in which capital, measures time and space, and, how the game itself subverts that, and in what ways does the tree's measurement of time impact him here? In what ways does it force him to view that world? In her own kind of assessment of capital, Patricia Westerford's final response is to set up a seed bank, because she starts to realize, right, that there is no end other than collapse. As she notes on page 304, how is extraction ever going to stop? It can't even slow down. The only thing we know how to do is growth all the way up to the cliff and over. And so it propels her to start collecting seeds, so that when the collapse comes, that the seeds will be there to begin to replenish kind of the full diversity of the forest. That's where her drive propels her as she faces capital and its effects. And then we have Olivia and Nick's journey, and how it's marked by time and kind of a recovery or a new sense of the tree's time. Olivia has the experience of being electrocuted and is dead for 1 minute and 10 seconds on pages 157 and 58. For the first time, she realizes that being alone is a contradiction in terms. Even in a body's most private moments, something else joins in. So she has a sense of being in the world in a wider way, a more communal way, which initiates her sense of connection with the forest and her sense of connection with the beings there. Nick has this realization as an artist in Iowa, right? And he knows there. It's amazing how crazy things become once you start looking at them. As he's looking at the chestnut tree, and as he's thinking through that world, what ways does that shape him as a person and as an artist, and in what ways does that draw him to Olivia's own journey as they go together. They experience the chestnut trees growing decay. She touches the spongy trunk on page 177, and they back away from the dying god, this huge tree that's in his family's yard. How does that sense of connection to the dying tree propel them into their journey as they become maidenhair and watchmen? They're the names that they adopt within their ecological group that lead them finally to the tree sit, which which opens up a new sense of how they are in the world, amidst the forest and the trees there, as he notes on page 264 and 5. On every side, trees lap at the low, wet sky. The clouds they themselves have helped to seed. Forests of 5 different shades bathe in the midst, each one a biome to creatures still to be discovered. Fogs from the world's infancy turn the clock back eons, and he feels himself becoming another species. It's that experience of time that each of the characters has that kind of redefines them, a sense of connecting to the tree's time and the tree's slow time, and a different way of being in the world, to the point that it redefines them as human beings, and it redefines their connection to this to a wider ecology. It'll be interesting to see how you connect to these characters' journeys as we rethink this middle part of Power's novel. Thanks.